September the 8th, 1941. Today, I will tell you my story. I was still a boy, 18 years old, and I thought I knew everything about the world because I could fix engines, straighten broken hubs, and hold my aim steady. I believed war was something far away, somewhere between maps and the black lines drawn in headquarters. But one day, those lines reached our homes, and the cartography of life was replaced by another kind of map, fragile, starving, drawn from boot steps and footsteps on frozen ground. The first days remain in my memory like a dream and like a film cut together by a director, a distant, barely audible rumble, then sirens, then the sky, crows and flashes, as if someone had turned the world upside down. Early in the morning, columns were being driven forward. People flowed through the streets carrying bundles, children's toys turning into sacks for bread. We, the young ones, barely had time to understand who we would become before we were already given a name: defenders. We were lined up near Nevsky Prospect, handed rifles, and given a feeling like metal in the mouth. First fear, then learning how to live with it. The encirclement did not happen all at once, but the sense of it was everywhere. Shopkeepers fell silent, stores closed, the radio spoke in broken phrases. Then came that day, the day when the city seemed to lose one of its walls and stood exposed to a foreign wind. Troops holding the approaches, artillery flashes on the horizon, and us standing shoulder to shoulder as if we ourselves had become the wall. Cold deserves its own book. Late autumn nights turned sharp as razors. We slept wrapped in whatever we could find: greatcoats, blankets, strips of newspaper, bodies pressed together, others' breath rising and falling, brushing against necks and cheeks. When the frost came, water in buckets turned into small blocks of ice, and the breathing of children near stoves sounded like branches scraping in the wind. We lit fires in basements, and fire became almost ritual. People came close, held out their hands as if praying, and stayed silent. Cold taught us to count: how many steps to the kitchen, how many minutes we could stand on post, how many grams of bread lay in a pocket. Everything was counted. Hunger is not a word, it is a sound. A changed tone in children's voices, the eyes of grown men searching frantic shops for something that could be traded for food. In the first months there was still bread, but rations shrank: 100 grams, 50 grams, 40. People began to carry spoons the way others carried church relics, and queues became pilgrimages to the stove. I remember once how a list of names for bread distribution turned into a prayer. People spoke the names of those who did not come, and the answer was silence and whispers. Brave women stood in line with children before dawn just to receive a piece of warm bread for infants. Hunger turned adults into children, hands trembling, eyes losing their shine, yet still clinging to a handful of hope. I saw old people die, not from wounds, but because their stomachs and hearts could no longer fight. I saw mothers hide the last piece of bread under a pillow so children would not know. I remember a neighbor, an architect by profession, who ate his own painting. He soaked a piece of old canvas in warm water and tried to chew it like bread. It was careless and terrifying, and we kept silent about it, as if it were a crime. A soldier's work under blockade was not only skirmishes and battles, it was hauling water, repairing pipes, guarding queues, and daily patrols where panic had to be kept from taking hold. There were days when our posts stood under bombardment, yet we had to hide fear from children because shared fear is heavier. A parent's fear spreads like disease and infects everyone. We taught people rations and simple rules. Do not frighten children. Do not discuss shortages aloud. Extinguish candles on time so artillery would not notice the light.
Memory of the first winter is, above all, the road across the ice. Lake Ladoga, which became the road of life, was the line between death and hope. At first, supplies came by boat, and when the cold set in, over thin ice. We guarded that road. It is hard to describe the fear and responsibility of standing at the ice's edge. Fodder, bread, flour, all of it went to people barely holding on. Every vehicle, every truck was a celebration. We met unfamiliar crews like relatives, hugged them, cried, and still people died right at the road's edge. Trucks stalled, ice cracked like old glass, and the terrible whisper spread, "One more truck will fall through, and no help will come." During the cold months, people began to eat everything, cats, dogs, sometimes, silently, each other. I do not want to live in those images, but silence makes history powerless. I saw a neighbor's wife, exhausted, trying to feed her child with what little remained. Hunger does not ask about morality. It was an inhuman exam, and many failed it. We tried to help, to warm, to give water, to share the last piece. Sometimes that piece saved not the body, but the soul, because knowing that someone nearby was sharing gave strength. Medical conditions were another chapter of suffering. Hospitals had no medicine, wounds healed slowly. Frost formed its own crusts on skin, infections spread quickly. Doctors worked against the impossible, stitching, making compresses from whatever they could find, whispering prayers over warmed bowls. We turned basements into improvised hospitals where curses and prayers were spoken in the same breath. Yet there were moments that felt almost magical. When radio reports came saying some convoy had passed somewhere, we ran to see the faces of sailors with dark circles under their eyes but packages in their hands. Lend-Lease did not begin at once, but rumors about distant ports where British and Americans sent ships through Arctic seas loaded with everything the world could spare. Those rumors warmed hearts. Convoys sailed to Murmansk through ice and fog, and when one passed, people waved from windows, and we soldiers knew, behind those trains of hope stood hundreds of people risking their own lives. We encountered betrayal and heroism alike. In the dark hours, there were those who sold their last supplies, and there were those who gave away everything without asking questions. One old man I will never forget was a shoemaker. 3 times he came to our unit with boots he had repaired himself for soldiers. He said simply, "You need to walk." His hands were calloused, his eyes clear. For him, the war ended in simple work, fixing a soul and nudging the world back toward normal life. There were military operations, too, reported in rare bulletins. We held outposts, repelled raids, set ambushes against enemy reconnaissance groups in the forests. But more often, our war was different, a war of survival. At night, we carried warm food when we could find it and hid remaining biscuits from children to prevent panic. Sometimes we staged tiny performances. Someone found an old accordion, someone wrapped footcloths like props, and for a minute people forgot the horror and laughed. Laughter then was a rare spark, and we guarded it like a candle in the wind. Sometimes we received letters from the front, from near Moscow or the Caucasus. We held them like talismans. I read one where a friend described how under machine gun fire they saved an officer's dog, and how that dog barked the next morning like a sign of resistance. Such details tore the heart between hope and despair. The world continued somewhere else, while time seemed to collapse on us like a winter sky. By spring, we knew every weak point of the blockade, where the ice was thinnest, where to find a warm stove, how to store winter clothes. We learned not to show weakness, because weakness drew attention and consumed trust. Notices appeared on the streets. Do not leave children unattended. Attention, outbreak of disease. Help your neighbors if possible. People held closer to one another because someone could always offer a spoon of soup or shield a child with their own hands. And still, deep inside, something else smoldered. Faith that one day bells would replace sirens. We spoke of it quietly, almost as a sin of hope, because believing in better times was dangerous then. But one spring day, a different sound reached the houses, a distant noise, as if the river itself had taken a breath. We stood in our homes and listened until someone finally said, "Do you hear that?" Ships. That word, ships, meant a miracle. I could go on until the end of the blockade, tell of every step and every nail in every door, but let that be another story. For now, I will stop at what I knew then. We lived in a world where every minute was a test, where hunger and cold ruled the streets, and where the words friend and neighbor meant more than ever before. And when people ask how we endured, I would answer simply, because there was a friend beside us and hope for a road that led to life. Winter had not yet released the city, but something new appeared in the air. Not warmth, but stubbornness. We no longer hoped quickly. We learned to hope for a long time. I was still that same boy, now 19, but inside I felt like an old man. My face in the mirror, when I managed to see it, had become angular, my eyes too old. We stopped counting age in years, only in winters. The city lived, though the word felt too loud. It existed. Smoke from chimneys was rare, but when it appeared, people stopped and watched it like a sign. In spring, we began clearing debris, pulling furniture, doors, anything that could burn from collapsed houses. I helped clear streets, with shovels, with hands, sometimes just with my body when strength ran out. We worked in silence. Conversation consumed energy, and energy was worth more than gold. Bread remained the measure of life. We learned to slice it thinner than paper. Rations were divided not by fairness, but by necessity. Children, the sick, those working at defense factories. I often stood guard near warehouses and saw women leave with tiny bundles pressed to their chests like infants. Sometimes they cried, sometimes they smiled, just as quietly. Bombardments did not stop. German artillery methodically struck neighborhoods, as if checking whether the city was still alive. We learned to distinguish the sound of a shell from the sound of a collapsing wall. Learned to get used to it. A terrible word. We grew accustomed to death the way one gets used to bad weather. But every time children died, something inside broke forever. I remember a school hit by a shell, notebooks mixed with brick, small shoes under the rubble. We carried out the bodies in silence. No one screamed. In besieged Leningrad, screaming was a luxury.
In the summer of 1942, it became a little easier to breathe, but not easier to live. Disease cut people down as mercilessly as hunger, scurvy, dystrophy, typhus. Once I fainted right at my post. I woke up in a basement where a nurse with a gray face gave me a spoon of warm water and said, "Live." It was not a wish, it was an order, and I obeyed. We heard about battles for the city, about attempts to break the ring. Those words, breakthrough, offensive, sounded like music. In 1942 and 1943, we lived in expectation. Every rumor grew into a legend. They said our troops were close, that our artillery was answering harder, that the enemy was exhausted. Sometimes it was true. Sometimes it was self-deception, without which survival was impossible. The road of life continued to operate, by water in summer, by ice in winter. I was assigned to guard one section. I saw barges arrive with flour, crates of canned food unloaded. We knew some of that aid came from the Allies. British canned meat, American flour, equipment, medicine. We did not think about politics. For us, it was simple. Someone out there, beyond the seas, had decided that we should live. That was enough. By 1943, I had become a different person. I no longer feared death the way I once had. I feared not living to see the end. I feared the city would die before it was freed. But it was then that a real sense of change appeared in the air. In January of 1943, we heard about a partial breakthrough of the siege. It was like the strike of a bell. People went out into the streets despite the cold, hugged one another, cried openly. We were still inside the ring, but the ring had cracked. With each month, enemy artillery strikes weakened. Our batteries answered more confidently. Factories, against all odds, kept working. I saw tanks roll out of workshops built by people who could barely stand on their feet. It was not just production, it was an act of defiance. And then came January of 1944. The day was gray and cold, but the air was different. We heard cannon fire that was not coming closer. It was moving away. The enemy was retreating. At first, no one believed it. Then came the order, then confirmation. The blockade was completely lifted. I stood in the street and did not know what to do. People laughed and cried at the same time. Some fell to their knees. Some stayed silent because there were no tears left. I looked at the houses, the streets, the river, and it felt as if the city was breathing for the first time in many years. Not deeply, cautiously, but breathing. There was no celebration in the usual sense. Too many had died. Too many were gone forever. But there was a feeling. We had endured. We had not surrendered. We had preserved the city, its culture, its memory. We had preserved ourselves. After the blockade was lifted, I served for a long time. The war continued, but for me the main battle was already behind me. I often returned in my thoughts to those who did not survive, to neighbors, to children, to old people by the stoves. They stayed with me forever. Today, telling this story, I am again that 18-year-old boy who first picked up a rifle, and also the old man who knows the price of bread and silence. The siege of Leningrad is not just a page of history. It is proof that a human being can endure where it seems endurance is impossible. We survived hunger. We survived cold. We survived fear. And if I am asked what helped us live, I will answer simply, we held on to one another. And that was enough to defeat death.